I do love the idea. It's like supposing you had a sort of parliament, and it's like 500 people or something, and it's like, all right, here's our 500 random people, and they got to figure out how to run this.
Exactly.
I think it would
right.
be an absolute, I think it would really surprise people. They think, oh, this would be an unbelievable shit show. It's like, okay, yeah, gee, imagine that, number one. What if the government sucked? But number two.
right. I mean, what is Congress's approval rating at this point? Like, how much lower can you sink?
Coops, which one of us is starting off?
I think it's you.
Okay. Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. And hearty welcome to our try guest for the third time.
Returning champion. Returning champion.
Yeah. Welcome, Jeff Spross.
Hi, everyone.
You knew him by his voice. We didn't even have to say his name. It's that sultry voice.
That basso profundo.
I was about to try to go like, hi. There we go. It's like I was like, hi, and then it just goes hi. Like nothing came out.
For all the listeners at home, if you've ever recorded yourself, maybe you know, but if you haven't, you get really self-conscious about how you sound when you're being recorded. And,
well, I don't.
And no, our voices vary so much. It's amazing. I've noticed.
Yeah, no, like I kind of wanted to like try to do a podcast where I just sound like Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2. Have you all lost your goddamn minds?
Ooh, we got to get Spross for some like clips that we can just, it's great.
Yeah.
Well, Coops, what are we talking about today? What did we read with the Spross?
Well, we read, everyone's favorite intellectual and, maestro of civilizational discourse, Ross Douthat, on meritocracy and aristocracy. And basically he had two columns in which he used the death of George H.W. Bush as a kind of jumping off point to say that meritocracy is kind of the god that failed and a poor way for organizing a society. And then when that got a lot of, I think, fairly deserved blowback,
flack.
Yeah, he said, oh, the WASPs, we need the WASPs again. He wrote another column in which he was really just drilling down into his core argument, which is that meritocracy is bad and that what you need is a kind of self-conscious elite. And is that a fair summary, would you say?
I think so. Yeah, it was like he wrote, I mean, like the blowback, it seemed to me, was mainly an issue of like people just basically being angry that he kind of, I mean, it was kind of like one of these things, like he basically suggested everything was better when like everyone in charge of the country was white and male, right? And like that like kind of got a lot of the blowback.
I mean, if we could only make America great again,
Right. But well, what was interesting to me about the whole thing is there is this strange overlap between that particular conservative critique and like sort of the left-wing critique of society, in the sense that like both of them reject meritocracy, I think, as, I don't know if like you could say they reject it as an organizing principle or just reject it as like, I mean, it's certainly coming from the left. I think it's more a rejection on the basis that just like you can't have an actual meritocracy. The whole idea kind of, as soon as you have an elite that is in a position of hierarchical power, they perpetuate themselves in perpetuity. They have the structural ability to do so. So meritocracy inevitably destroys itself. This is kind of like the Chris Hayes argument from Twilight of the Elites, which I think he based on previous arguments as well. But what is interesting is it creates, I think, this interesting like three-way argument where you have like conservatives come in and say meritocracy isn't good because it makes elites too confident. It makes them believe they got where they are in their position of power through their own hard work and struggle and superior intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. And it would be better if we went back to the old school, like WASP elite or otherwise, where the elites knew they were elites and, the aristocracy was perpetuated itself, but it was at least aware that it was doing this. And so it had like a certain sense of noblesse oblige. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then you have sort of the center left liberal crowd that comes in is like, well, no. Like, meritocracy is good. We have like diversified the elite. We have brought in women. We have brought in people of color, et cetera, and this has made the elite better. And then I kind of feel like the left, or at least me, I don't know how much of the rest of the left I'm representative of, but I
just
come
you.
in.
It's just you. It's just you, Jeff.
Me. But like, I come in and I'm just like, maybe like going back to the old WASP model would result in a more self-aware elite, but I'm just not sure that whether or not the elite is self-aware matters all that much in comparison to the fact that they have power and
the elites have become self-aware.
Right? Yeah. It's like I'm not sure that the elites pulling a Skynet and realizing their own nature like actually matters. And so I come in and it's kind of like, well, I agree that like the arrival of a diverse, gender and racial diverse meritocratic elite didn't actually improve the elite all that much, but I'm not sure going back would matter because we're debating the internal moral quality of the elite, and I just don't. I'm not confident that matters in any way, shape, or form compared to like the importance of, structurally reforming society and taking down capitalism and all the rest of it. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, baby. Here's a quote that beautifully.
I don't know. Did I sum up all that well? I don't know.
I liked it.
It's a good.
I liked it. I got the goosies right. Is that a term for goosebumps?
I
goosies?
have no idea.
I might have just made that up. I don't know. Here's a quote from the Douthat. Quote, "One of the lessons of the age of meritocracy is that building a more democratic and inclusive ruling class is harder than it looks." Oh dear. "And even perhaps a contradiction in terms. You can get rid of the social registers and let women into your secret societies and privilege SATs over recommendations from the rector of Justin and the headmaster of St. Crotlick's." I can't even pronounce it. "And you still end up with something that is clearly a self-replicating upper class, a powerful elite filling your schools and running your public institutions." So there's this purpose in Douthat's argument to find a way to have not a better society, not a more diverse society, not a more democratic society, but a better ruling class. And there's such a beautiful giveaway in that. Like, he's trying to come out as the reasonable, compassionate, thoughtful pundit and fully admits that the utopia for which he seeks is to find a very good ruling class to subject us all to, which I think says it all, about something he's making explicit that is otherwise implicit in what we might call our representative democracy.
Yeah, and there's the aspect of maybe over focus on the qualities of the elite, and like, how do we cultivate the learned philosopher kings who will do the good things, make the quality decisions that we all must, have. And yeah, that's one aspect of it. And I think what struck, when I wrote a little bit of a response to this, and after thinking about it a little bit more, I think that, he lands some very good blows, I think, against the current meritocracy, but I think it's a pretty open question as to whether the current ruling class is even trying to be democratic or inclusive, or whether it's just like a sort of an aristocracy of quote unquote brains, and so that's like kind of two different things. And then secondly, you think about the previous ages of aristocracy, and it really seems as though Douthat is romanticizing the past. And this is kind of the problem with aristocracy, is he's trying to counterpose it with the current system and being like, oh, aren't things better? Weren't they better rather back then than they are today? But like, the previous WASP establishment had some really terrible characteristics, like John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles, he talks about George H.W. Bush, but what about his son? Isn't that guy like the aristocrat's aristocrat? I mean, literally the son of a president, same WASP family as his father, and just your classic aristocratic fail son, hard drinking.
But here's the interesting thing, if I may start ranting already, is that what Rousseau wrote about in his first discourse is that instead of actually, we've lost the appreciation for actual virtue, which is good action, like in service of others and excellence in relating to others. And, quote unquote, civilization basically came up with politeness, manners, civilization, which gave certain norms to indicate that you were a worthy person of respect or honor, as did formalities, titles, being a professor, being a knight, sir. All these things replaced actual good behavior and were signifiers of your reputation and so forth. And in many ways, like Trump, right, is shitting all over those bourgeois indicators of you're a good person. So we had people like George H.W. got so much praise across the board, even from people that were, liberal at least. I don't know about the left, in part because a lot of indicators were met in terms of civility and norms and all that shit that masked the actual violence of the policies and politics, right? So Rousseau is trying to say that people get blinded to the slavery and the chains that they're in because of this new creation of a system of norms, right? And so a part of what's going on here is that the right-wingers miss the slavery that was instituted for the masses when it was at least cloaked under the guise of civility and certain respectability politics, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly what Douthat would say about Obama in terms of fitting into his scheme. He's certainly more of a meritocrat than an aristocrat. He's certainly not a WASP. Anyway, it certainly seems as though Obama is closer to his ideal than Trump, right? But that's a really good demonstration of just what you're talking about, Alexei, which is the way that a manifestly capable, intelligent leader can do stuff that is just appallingly horrible and immoral, namely, when faced with a gigantic financial crisis, like push all of the losses onto hapless, helpless homeowners while protecting his, cronies in the banking system. And no one will acknowledge that it happened because he's too dignified, he's too polite, he's too virtuous or whatever. Like it's like, oh, he wouldn't do something like that. And the fact of him not seeming to be able to conduct something like that, or drone strike American children with no due process of any kind.
You see, Ryan, a person so dignified, eloquent, and kind and forthright would never do something actually immoral. So there must be something okay about the bombing of brown people and, signature strikes and all kinds of assassinations based on, I don't know, behavior patterns rather than even knowing who we're killing. None of that matters because he seems like a nice guy. This is basically the liberal version of, I'd have a beer with Bush. He seems like a good guy. He can do no wrong.
Yeah. Kevin Drum wrote this exact argument. I don't think I could find it now, but it was basically that, like, facing with the idea of signature strikes, where basically you're killing people, you don't even have any idea who they are. They just fit patterns of behavior that the military came up with. It's like, oh, he wouldn't do that because that's evil. And he doesn't seem evil to me, so therefore he must not have done it.
Well, no, but the thing is, I think this is tied to our broader topic of representative democracy. Don't you think, Jeff? Like the fact that, like, we don't actually, the demos, the people, really rule or govern anything. It's a bunch of elites that we, like, vote up or down every couple years, right? That do basically everything. That we don't even have much of a hand in selecting who those people are. And yet, right? And yet we think that this is like a democracy. Some people think that.
Well, I think so that is flagging another piece we read, but I think before we get into that, I can also say, like, I think there's like there's several layers of paradox going on here, in the sense that if we're going, at least if I was going to classify like the last, century in terms of like how the elites performed and what forms of elites we went through, the best performance is probably the 40s and the 50s, with like, a tail end into the 60s with the achievement of civil rights. But the main things are like World War II, New Deal, like massive, like momentary full employment achievement, major like equality, sharing of prosperity across the board. And then towards the end of that process, like the first real movement towards like civil rights and integrating African Americans into the franchise and somewhat into the economy, at least, though obviously there's still a very long way to go. But like, I think you look at that, and that's like an era when the elites actually were answerable to the broad masses of people, to, if not to like an ideal degree, at least to a degree that's vastly greater than it is right now. Like, you had an organized labor movement. You had the civil rights movement. You had a lot of bottom up power going on, right? Like Roosevelt. This is the whole like traitor to his class thing with Roosevelt. It's like he basically sided with the labor unions and smashed everybody else for a little while. And then you get into the 60s and 70s, and I would say the 60s and 70s is where you have like the WASP Unbound moment. And
can we title the episode "The Wasp Unbound"?
Yeah,
sure.
I like that. So you get the WASP Unbound moment. What do you get with the WASP Unbound moment? Well, you do get the civil rights era, but you also get kind of the end of the civil rights era. You get deindustrialization. You get like the rise of modern monetary policy that like climaxes in 1980 with Paul Volcker smashing the working class. Like tax cuts for the wealthy really kick off in the 60s, like under JFK. You get Vietnam. I mean, we can go on. So like, you begin to get this, like, you begin to get the failures that actually have characterized the current era, where we move into the third form of the elite with the meritocrats, where we have Iraq, Afghanistan, the financial crisis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, like, that gets, I think that gets, it's this weird thing where, like, the main accomplishment of, like, the elites from the era that Ross Douthat is, like, trying to praise is largely an economic accomplishment that contradicts his own ideology, which is like the first weird thing about this. But then there's also the question of just like, what was actually at work there? Was it that we had a better elite in the 40s and 50s, or was it that we had an elite, aristocratic or meritocratic, that was actually like answerable to bottom-up democratic power for a brief moment of history?
Right. And when you have a politics, like, and I've done this whole polis oikos dichotomy, the polis is the kind of the community, the broader community that's being served. The oikos in Greek means household, and so like it's the root of economics. And like the modern turn is to subvert and invert, which is on top. And so economics, the households, the many different households are being served by the politicians, by the government, instead of households serving the common good, right? So to the extent that like the elites were helping various households that had power in voting people in and out, right? As long as the economy was serving those people and enriching the right people, there wasn't too much of a problem with the ruling class, right? But as Piketty and various others have shown, that form of politics, right, where individual households are supposed to grow their wealth in this political economy that we have, the failure of that then redounds back onto whoever's in charge, and it just hasn't been working. And so all of a sudden there's all kinds of people and reasons we can point out that we can blame for that, right? But fundamentally it might really have to do with the political economy and whether it's worked for people, right?
Yeah, no question. And I think to your point, Jeff, about the 1930s, and FDR, who was a WASP, I suppose, but certainly the best president of all time, in his, which that's not saying a lot.
Yeah, I know. Like FDR had his problems.
Yeah. But in his political orientation, he was elite skeptical and contemptuous of his own class later in his presidency. As he the way that he personally behaved and the way that he set up his policies. Like when the first I don't even think he really, biographers speculate whether he actually really believed in New Dealism as a sort of somewhat haphazard ideology, or whether he was more of a progressive personally. But one thing he did know, that like when lots of very rich and powerful people told him that he couldn't do something, he was pretty much always like, I don't know about that. You guys are probably full of shit. And like that is like A+ characteristic in a president. Don't believe what
Eleanor probably helps him a bit as well.
Absolutely,
let's be
yes.
honest.
Well, and the question about like who is any one person really responsible for like how they behave exactly, or is those like FDR the legend, the sort of like
right,
visible symbol of this vast complex of people, including Eleanor Roosevelt, all these labor leaders, like various economists, Rexford Tugwell,
apparently the historian Richard Hofstadter, the paranoid style, apparently his wife had like a huge influence on his work. There's just so innumerable cases where this. But Coops, did
I
you
hear
know, by the
that's
way,
true of.
Go ahead. Who's it true of?
Just as a quick aside, I hear that's true of Robert Lucas, the famous Rational Expectations Chicago school economist guy. One of these like hyper individualists that like he was basically ripping off his first wife for a lot of his.
Not so much of an individual there, Robert.
Unconfirmed rumors, allegedly.
I'm going to call him Bob from now on.
Yeah.
Take that, Bob.
You were saying.
Coops, did you know that the first place we stayed in Greece a couple summers ago, the man that owned the property was a student of Eleanor Roosevelt's?
You did tell me that, yeah.
Yeah.
Small world.
Small world.
Well, I wanted to tee off on something that Ryan said, which was just like this idea that like a president, or really like any like major executive official, like is really, when we talk about that person as like a politician, as someone who did things and has like a legacy, we're really talking about like a whole crowd of people that sort of like built the team around them, both in like terms of like official positions and in terms of like social relations and people who advise them like behind the scenes, like a wife or something like that. And I think that's very true. And B, I was actually wanted to pick Ryan's brain a bit more about like how Roosevelt went about building his team, because I think it'd be interesting to contrast that with something like today with like the Obama administration, where they it's like we're going to get the best and the brightest for everyone. And when you do that, you actually wind up pulling from a very small and narrow socioeconomic pond, because there's like a few institutions that are at the top of the credential ladder in their respective fields. So you yank everybody from that, and you wind up with like people who have like a very narrow set of experiences and a very narrow set of worldviews a lot of the time. So I was wondering like if FDR's team could be held in contrast to that in any particular way.
I'm definitely not a super like expert on the Roosevelt like administration exactly. And I do know that, the big part of the brain trust was like some pretty high status like guys. So there was Rexford Tugwell, who was from Columbia. There was Adolph Burrell, and Raymond Moley. I think they were also from Columbia. However, they were like pretty heterodox, especially Tugwell. Tugwell is like a real radical. He was a big like central planning type of guy. Like he was, like I think you could say pretty clearly a democratic socialist type of in his sort of basic outlook. But there was it was also just like what's his there I can't remember his name, but I know that in his attempt to change the gold standard, FDR went around until he found this like agricultural economist, I think from Cornell, a guy who was like way down the, total nobody at the time. Can't remember his name. But basically he just said, what FDR wanted to hear, which is that you can do what you want with the gold standard, that like it's basically crap and you don't need to worry about it. And so like, yeah, specific lessons, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it goes to show the importance of having someone who is, like he clearly did want to get people who knew what they were talking about, like they had some experience, but at the same time he was, I think, biographers would agree that in the, the classic guys like Irving Fisher, the classic economist, he was a guy who was like, in like 1929, like I think that stocks have reached a permanently high plateau. And so when he was, that when the economy's melting down and all these economists were like, well, you can't do anything, you can't do anything different than what Hoover is doing because that would be irresponsible. And I think like FDR had the necessary skepticism that I would say it was almost certainly like radically fueled by the collapsing society around him. When he was like if he had been president at a different time, he probably would have been like, well, okay, these guys seem to know what they're talking about. But when it's like literally the worst economic catastrophe that has ever happened.
Can I also say that Irving Fisher is the nerdiest name ever and possibly the person that will never take a risk? I just think like Irving Fisher is a guy that like plays everything in the most risk-averse way possible. I'm just saying Irving Fisher, you want him to do your taxes, to quote When Harry Met Sally, but Irving's not going to do it for you in bed, nor is he the guy to like be bold when it comes to economic crisis. I'm just going to say.
Yeah, but when during the transition period, and all of the the big shot economists, I think Fisher may have been among them. But anyway, there's a bunch of people who are just like, all right, FDR, you can't do anything with the gold standard, and he just sort of grinned and nodded at them. And he's like, okay, sure, yeah, whatever you say, boys. And then it's the second he got into office, it's like, I'm confiscating all the gold in the country. And we're basically breaking the gold standard right here.
This kind of predated the era of meritocracy in the sense that there was this kind of neutral, quote-unquote, non-ideological, technocratic ethos, right? That is what both the left and the right are critiquing right now, this notion that if we just get like smart people, that they can just like pull the levers of government in the correct way, and that's all we need. And politics can basically be reduced to a science in this way, which is totally absurd and part of the problem. So that predated that notion, I think, right? And so part of the failures of meritocracy that Chris Hayes documented in Twilight of the Elites, and that we've seen, and the response to it on the right, like in Trump or in Douthat, and on the left, is this neoliberal fantasy that economics, right, which is just oikos, which is just about like how the levers of the transfers of wealth can be kind of fixed through governmental means, replaces ideology and ideas of the good and normative questions. So it's really, I think, that's really being attacked from both the left and the right because it's failed, because it's not true, Yeah,
listen, I've had this interesting experience just because my college degree is in filmmaking. So what the fuck am I doing reporting on economics? And yet, I've been doing it for about 8 years now, and I do get the funny sense sometimes that I've come to understand this stuff better than a lot of the people with PhDs, which makes me nervous to say, but I am kind of willing to stand behind it. But one of the things that's impressed on me is that I think expertise is important. And here I'm relating this to the economics field, but I'm sure you could expand this point to other areas. I think expertise is important, but my car mechanic is an expert in cars, right? No one would consider him an elite or a credentialed person. That's a blue collar role. But it's just he built up knowledge over time by dealing with his particular field on a day-to-day basis, or her particular field. I'm sure a lot of car mechanics are female. And what am I trying to say? I'm saying expertise is important, but we have transformed expertise into a kind of cultural performance and the possession of a particular set of credentials. And I think there's like a lot of things. Economics is one, but there are a lot of fields in the world that like just a normal person could like master with a few years and just the opportunity to do so.
So this is a great point. This is the difference between true excellence, which is a skill which anyone can accumulate through practice, right? And pedigree, which has to do with what's required for you to be recognized as excellent, right? And that disconnect, that disjuncture is what Rousseau was attacking, right? So the same first discourse I was talking about on the arts and sciences, he won an essay contest that was supposed to be about how the arts and sciences lead to the purification of morals. And he basically said, no, fuck that. That's actually been the root of all evil. And his point was like, true philosophers are great, but Socrates didn't publish shit. He didn't have fucking tenure. I'm using 21st century language, but like he's saying that like there are people that are artists, there are people that are philosophers, there are people that are good at things, but what gets recognized, reputation gets built off of bullshit. It gets built off of how well you talk, not how well you can do things. And as we know in capitalism, it also has to do with your connections and the structures that feed the Brett Kavanaughs through the system. As long as you act manly, get drunk, and rape women, apparently, then you can get to the Supreme Court. Allegedly attempted. Yeah, he's a public figure, so I have a free speech, wider latitude. I can say things. Public figure. Okay. No, but that's the but no, seriously though. So the point is, our quote unquote meritocracy is not actually based on excellence. Right? It's based on who people say should be in charge, which usually has to do with wealth and power, not with actual merit.
Yeah, and there's a distinction there, which I think is a move that I think that the sort of technocratic neoliberals tend to make, which is worth drawing out, and that is, so you talk about a mechanic, you talk about a doctor, a surgeon, or an airline pilot. And that's like a very clear case of for doing something that looks like meritocracy, at least in some ways, even though, like a lot of times the people who are flying the plane are just like the people who have put in the most hours as opposed to like pass the most tests or whatever. But at any rate, so here's a very well-defined set of skills that you can develop, and you can see very clearly what is going on and what the standards are and what good performance means.
What good? You can define good. You can define the good, exactly.
And then you're transferring that sort of intuition that we should have the best pilots flying our planes, or at least like the pilots that fly should be very good, up to a very high standard of surgery, very high standard of, doing physics or something, and then you transfer that into the political realm. You're like, oh, I want the smartest, the best people to be doing politics, as if politics is this sort of thing like flying a plane. As if you just need to do you just need to operate the levers correctly, and it's not. To be fair,
it's not mechanical in that way. But to be fair to like political philosophy, literally, Plato's Republic is about this, and there's an analogy of like a boat being captained and how the problem for philosophers is that the unwise don't recognize wisdom. And so you have someone who knows how to like captain the ship because he's looking at the stars to see, how to do it. But because the unwise don't realize that's how you figure out your location and find the way that the ship should go, they think he's just stargazing. And so they kill him, and they just like vote for the person that basically, they just throw. So this is where politics come in. They put the person that's the smooth talker, right? That's like the sophist in power, rather than looking to who actually knows what is worthy and what's necessary to kind of actually do the thing to which the person in charge has to do, right? And then
the move that I'm talking about is maybe Plato is somewhat guilty of this, but I think when you're talking about like Jon Stewart talking about how he wants to, the president to be embarrassingly superior to himself and so forth. The problem with politics is not that you need people who are competent. The problem with politics is that that people disagree about what should be done, and to hash out those disagreements,
Right.
you need moral theories to
That's exactly that's why the ancients did not separate politics from ethics and morality. They were bound up together necessarily. Of course,
yes.
That's the whole point. But modernity separates them, and that's the problem. The whole
Well,
problem.
yeah, it's like if you're going to equate like a good politician and policymaker to a good pilot, you have to define like what constitutes successfully landing the plane in the realm of politics and policy. Like, hey, we saved Wall Street. The financial system is stabilized. 10 million people lost their homes, but the financial system is stabilized. Like, does that count as landing the plane? Like, that's the whole question.
Yeah. And the problem with technocracy is it tries to obscure that question. It think like, we all agree because we've defined all the relevant questions out of the discussion.
Well, a cool move that the ancients do, and like Aristotle was big on this, he was basically like, just like the human body, if it's well like functioning, if it's healthy, right, it will last longer. The body politic, if it's healthy, will last longer. So let's look at what regimes lasted a long time and which ones basically exploded or were overthrown. And then we can like scientifically find out what actually goes into preserving regimes and what's health. You know what I mean? So like they had a whole fucking methodology for this shit. It's brilliant, right? But we don't do that shit. You know what I mean? But guess what? With Trump and everything that's going on now, looks like shit is not going to last long. You know what I mean? And that's a sign of how unhealthy the body politic is.
Well, at least we'll be a nice splatter on the walls of science for future generations.
A giant burn mark on like the graph of history. Just like everything blew up right here. So don't do that again. Okay, so now I want to ask the question. And I think this will get into like some of the other stuff we read. But if meritocracy is not that great an idea, what do we replace it with? Right? Like what's our alternative schema? And one thing that I thought was I don't know if you guys read it, but that I read was this piece that Helen Andrews wrote.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah, I'm not sure who it. I don't know. It was like in Hedgehog Review.
Hedgehog Review, that's right,
and a few other places too. But the first half of the essay is really interesting because it talks about like the arrival of meritocracy in like the civil service in Britain.
And it's called the new ruling class. The new ruling class, for those that want to check it out.
The name of the essay is the new ruling class. So this first half is actually fascinating just because it talks about kind of like the social and political tensions that come up where it's like today we take it as like just commonsensical that like we should have a battery of tests, and like people should pass all these like, multiple choice answer things to like be sure they're like the best civil servants in all their given fields.
By the way, as a professor, multiple choice is a terrible pedagogical tool in order to test people. Anyway,
from the horse's mouth, people. But yeah, and she talks about like all like the resistance that this got of like people who had been doing this stuff for a long time, saying like this is a terrible way to figure out the best person for the job. Like, and it goes into kind of like the way this displaced like the old like seniority systems or like even political patronage systems. And it's interesting because it makes you think about just like, okay, political patronage doesn't maybe always get you the best person, but it maybe gets you a person who's like invested in the good of the particular coalition that brought them to power, et cetera, et cetera. So it brings up all those like kind of interesting ideas. The second half of the essay basically does the same thing Ross Douthat does, which is say what we need is an aristocracy that's aware it's an aristocracy and that like engages in noblesse oblige, blah, 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 blah. Helen Andrews is a conservative. This is not surprising. But the first half of that essay is interesting precisely because it presents a window into the introduction of meritocratic ideas, this moment in history where ideas that we now take as just, like I said, commonsensical, the moment when they actually like were introduced into the system and the fact that it created like a massive backlash before they finally won.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a useful takeaway there maybe is that meritocracy has become so ingrained. You think that like, well, whatever you're doing, you should have to pass some sort of a qualification exam or something like that. Like you should have to have some sort of credential to be able to get those sort of jobs is so unobjectionable to think that if someone's just giving it to you because like someone's cousin's cousin, then that then that is like prima facie like a terrible way to do anything. And like the fact of the matter was, when that was the way things were done, like things were maybe like somewhat less efficient than they are today, but like it wasn't like it functioned as a like there were these very what seemed to us ridiculous ways to organize your sort of like national institutions, which work just they work just fine in their own context.
They were stable. They were terrible, but stable. So the problem with quote unquote meritocracy is it's like just as terrible, but more unstable. So like the myth was this, and there was something to this, right? Like the fact that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was in 1776, published the same year as the Declaration of Independence. There was this democratizing move, in modernity, that moved away from like bloodlines and hereditary aristocracy, right? And was supposed to be eventually what became meritocracy based on your ability to accumulate wealth, right? Your oikos, your ability to use the government's ability to protect your property rights to become wealthy and powerful. And so merit replaced bloodlines. And that was supposed to be some equalizing thing, right? That was supposed to be modern and liberating or liberal in a sense. But the problem is it's a fucking myth and lie, actually. Like, if you look at the Supreme Court and you see not just Harvard and Yale are the only law schools represented, but the two new justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, are from the same fucking prep school, right? This is just emblematic of the lie, right? That meritocracy actually has something to do with like equal opportunity, right? And in Twilight of the Elites, there's this beautiful example that I give to my students all the time about like theoretically the most egalitarian meritocracy thing, right? Which is the best supposedly school in New York City that is public is a charter school, and it's all based on test scores. So it doesn't matter if you know if the mayor's your father, it doesn't matter who you know, it's all quote unquote merit, right? Just the scores. Except of course the fucking rich kids game the system by hiring tutors who know the test to teach them how to game the test. And so it actually replicates exactly the inequality because there is no such thing as equal opportunity if you don't adjust the actual resource distribution, right? And so like meritocracy is a myth. It's a lie in order to mask the social relations and power relations that basically just recapitulate all of the inequality that stems from the system to begin with, right? And it also lacks all of the kind of aesthetic pleasure of kind of the royal family or any right, like all the things that like the people who were subjugated before actually were kind of pacified with, the pageantry and kind of the civility and the, pinky in the air, civility, whatever, that's gone too now, right? And it's less stable. So we have like a less stable, bullshit, vulgar version of aristocracy now.
Yeah,
right.
People, their only skill is taking tests. And so, of course, they're terrible at being in charge of the United States because all they're good at is filling in bubbles. You spend your entire life like being an apple polisher, and you create it's a people who can't find when it comes to practical knowledge,
Right. Well, and this is one of the things that like when I was reading Helen Andrews' essay, that like it kind of sparked me because I was thinking like it almost like it, and it kind of scared me for a second because I was like maybe political patronage isn't like the worst system in the world, just because like let's say you get something like an FDR where you have a regime, an administration, however you want to put it, that comes to power that clearly owes its arrival in power to like an organized like labor upheaval, an organized labor movement, that kind of thing, and then they distribute like positions of control within the administration based on patronage. So what you're going to get is people who are in those different positions who are loyal to a particular definition of the good. Like we said, like they have like, because this is like a labor like driven movement, or like a movement driven by like we need to like democratize the economy, distribute wealth equitably. Like, you've defined what it means to land the plane, right? And you are now going to put people in positions of power who like all share that definition. And then getting back to the other thing that I said, just like, okay, they haven't like passed all the credentials and passed all the tests, but like, again, like most of these fields are fields that like, you can master from a kind of blue collar perspective, right? You just like, if you just like, grind away at them for a few years, even if you grind away at them in obscurity, you can figure out the main points. So like, you can get people through the system who aren't going to like wreck everything, right? They're going to run it well, and they're going to run it with like a good vision, of the good. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. Look, it's not hard to be Brett Kavanaugh, to be like a drunken frat boy who like allegedly molests women and, is the valedictorian and is on all the sports teams. He just happened to be placed in the right prep school, and he's like, okay, I just need to be a drunk frat boy, and then I can get ahead in life. And get straight A's. Yeah. So it's not like that pedigree is especially impressive. It's just very particular, right?
Right.
Yeah. And this, I think, maybe to round out this part of the discussion is to, Andrews has I think that like the defenders of aristocracy kind of they rely on a there is no alternative type of, it's like whatever, meritocracy, yes. You get an elite. Yes. Aristocracy is an elite. So like you might as well have an elite that at least like tries to do its job well, right? To try to take the advantage. And so, so she says that, for one thing, the minority of families willing to do whatever it takes to get into Harvard will still do whatever it takes to get into Harvard. They have adapted to new admissions criteria before, and they will do so again. And this brings up, I think, the that article that you sent, this review. We'll post it. It's a review of a book called The Principles of Representative Government. It's called A Fresh Look at Representation. And so it goes through the history of representative democracy, which is something that was basically invented in the 18th and 19th centuries. The idea that you have an election, you create an elect, as it were, and that may be, potentially thinking of a way of selecting people who are, part of the governing class that is random might be worth looking into, because that's how democracy worked back in ancient Athens. And this, I think, really is an underrated idea, because
we're talking about the lottery system now, correct?
Yeah. Indeed. Selection by lot. Ancient Athens, selection by lot. For those that wanted to, right? So you would actually have to say you were interested. But then if you were interested, it's like taking your name out of a hat, basically. All of the citizenry, all of the people would be equally available to be picked to rule in various offices. There are a few, there's a very select few offices that weren't by lot. So like if you were a general and you needed particular skills, right, to fight battles, that's different. But like most posts in the government, right, came from the demos by lot, by random selection.
Yeah, and
I just wanted to make sure we clarified how that worked. Anyway, Ryan.
Yeah, and here's a thing that is literally impossible to game. That there is no way that if you're a rich person, supposing you set up your Harvard admissions system, not that Harvard is really, where we should be getting all of our, congressmen or whatever, but you could set it up such that like, okay, we're going to set like a standardized test score, which is like really not that high. It's like you got to have a GPA of 3.0 and, 1200 or whatever on the SATs, like something that's really not that difficult to get, that like probably like half the graduating high school students could get. And then we're just from there, we're just going to draw names out of a hat. We're just like everyone who applies, we're just going to pick them at random. You can't do anything about that if you're an elite person, if you're Malia Obama or whatever. And I think similarly, if you were talking about Say that a third of or a half the House of Representatives was selected in this sort of fashion. Could that possibly be any worse than the system we have now? Like, almost certainly not. I think it would be a huge improvement. Like, you can't possibly argue me out of that idea.
Totally. Well, for a number of reasons. I don't know which ones we want to get into, but like, this is what most of my students don't realize, that what we call democracy today is a modern invention that's quote unquote representative democracy, which is actually aristocracy, right? So like ancient what we call direct democracy is this notion that literally the people or the poor or the masses or everyone had equal opportunity to govern, be governed, to propose laws, to challenge laws. Today the only form we have of this is like there's referendums, there's juries, which are by lot, except the juries in ancient Athens were like composed of 250 citizens for a jury, right? Like, so it's like really you get the sense that, they really wanted lots of voices, right? And it was like lots of random voices. And there was truly like the people governing, right? Which is very different from rule by the elite, because the point that Bernard Manin, or however you pronounce his name, is making in the book, and I teach chapters from this book, he's making a great point that like necessarily any form of election, right, like Ryan intimated, the elect, is about selecting based on some kind of ranking, some type of hierarchy, right? So you're trying to elect the best on some kind of criteria. And that means you're definitely not doing rule by the people, which is basically supposed to be without regard to who they are or what the differences are, right?
Right. We're not trying, right, under the lottery system, we are literally rejecting the idea that we should be picking the best. And we are just saying we should pick a random sampling that gives us an overall representative population of like the greater population, an overall representative elected or set of officials that it truly is just a random sampling to give you kind of like a microcosm of the greater society they're supposed to be governing.
Yeah. And I do love the idea. It's like supposing you had a sort of parliament, and it's like 500 people or something, and it's like, all right, here's our 500 random people, and they got to figure out how to run this.
Exactly.
I think it would
right.
be an absolute, I think it would really surprise people. They think, this would be an unbelievable shit show. It's like, okay, yeah, gee, imagine that, number one. What if the government sucked? But number two.
Right. I mean, like, what is Congress's approval rating at this point? Like, how much lower can you sink?
Yeah.
No, but what if like the solution isn't about finding the genius that has a certain skill set that we need, but instead have people that actually are tethered to reality and have like some understanding of the needs. Now, granted, this is in a way what the House of Representatives was supposed to be, right? Like so like the House and the Senate were based on two different models of representation, and if kind of the Madisonian era proportions would have maintained, we would have like 27,000 representatives in the House today based on our population or something like that, right? So like they thought that the House of Representatives was really supposed to be based on not kind of like expertise, but like, oh, you look like me because I'm a farmer and you're a farmer. Let's put 10 farmers in there, right? Like, let's just like literally like try to mirror. It's called mirror representation. Try to mirror the population. Well, and the Senate was supposed to counterbalance that in a way and try to be kind of the elites that are going to refine and enlarge.
Right. The Senate was supposed to be the House of Lords. Right.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So you have the passions and the will of the people in the House, and you have kind of like the cooling effect of like the moderating influence of the House of Lords.
Right.
And they thought this shit through, right? But like today, we don't have any of that. Like the representative.
We have two houses of lords.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but like, imagine that. Like, you could just imagine something like where we had like 27,000 representatives in the House, but we also like, what if we just banned like private contributions to campaigns entirely and set up some kind of like lottery system to say we will have X number, like, I don't know, I'm just making shit up at this point, but like X number of people can like run for office in any given district, and we have some way of sorting them. I'm not sure how it would work, but then we just give them a pot of public money and say, "Go campaign, do your best to get your message to the people, and see who they pick."
Spross, did you know in ancient Athens, anybody could just basically show up at the assembly and propose a law at any point?
I mean, that sounds brilliant.
Isn't that amazing? Is that
I would.
cool?
I have a whole list. I could walk into the House of Representatives right now and be like, "I've got you guys covered."
And they had to fucking listen to it, right? But that also inculcated in the citizenry they felt like, oh shit, I have power, I can do things. And so they felt responsible to that power. And so in ancient Greek, the word idiot means private person, and private had to do with your oikos or your household affairs, right? And so like, you were an idiot if all you cared about was your private interest. And now all we have is a nation of idiots that just care about their private households. That's not their fault. That's how we've set the system up. But like, back in the day, it was like you had the power to influence things, and so you cared about like your ability to do so. So you tried to figure out, hey, shit, how should we be doing things?
Well, yeah, it's like, I mean, just the problem of just like of apathy, justified apathy. I should say it.
Totally, it's totally inculcated. Yeah,
justified, rational apathy of voters who just look at the government and are like, "What the fuck does it matter?"
Yeah.
No, they're right to do that. They are correct to have
and all we do is people, and this is Bernard Manin, like this is his point. All we do is vote up or down. And so we're like, are these assholes helping us or not? Nope, they're not. And that's basically or like maybe we can have a protest and make them think that we might vote them out. And that's our power, basically.
Yeah.
And I think, I definitely agree. Very good points, but I do want to pull one thing out, and I think maybe slightly defend Andrews's like perspective on the elite a little bit, problematically perhaps, which is to say that regardless of how you're going to like select this thing, like there is no way around the necessity of leadership, in my opinion. That's, I think, a situation where there is no alternative. And I think that the left in this country has been pretty allergic to the idea of having to like unite around like platforms and potentially like, give people prominence if just by accident. You look at like the way the Occupy Wall Street was set up to where any one person could block discussion. The idea that you can have this sort of radically egalitarian thing in which no one ever got above anybody else. So
that's an anarchist move that is happening again with the yellow vest in France, and I agree that is totally problematic.
But and that's the thing you have to think. That's a very difficult thing to do because it really is fraught. I think to say, but you can't get around it either.
Yeah, I think, and this is a thing where it's like, I think it's fashionable amongst like a lot of people. I see it on the left, but I think it's fashionable like a lot of places to say like no one cares about process, right? That like everyone just wants to like be able to exert their will. But this is like this question of leadership and how to like you have to have a leadership. There is no alternative to leadership, but you also have to have a structure, an institutional structure that prevents the leadership from perpetuating itself, that ensures this churn and this sampling from the people, like in a genuine sense. Like that is a question of process. That is a question of institutional design, right? And there's no getting around the fact that you have to figure out that institutional design. You have to get that right. And this is
No, look, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Presley, a number of new lefties in power are great examples of leaders who are powerful because of the ways in which they reflect their being in touch with the people they're serving, their constituency, right? They have talents, right? They have charisma, they have intelligence, they have various skills that are really important, but unlike Beto, for example, right? That's not it. That's not the end of the story, their particular skills, right? Those skills are conducive to serving the interests of the left because their ideology is both in substance leftist, but also their procedure is being in touch with the movement itself. and dictating how they act in accordance with the masses, right? So I think that and it's super important. Like if you look at Varoufakis, right, like, and what happened with Chypris and Chypris folding, like, I don't know what the idiom would be, like, yes, whatever folds really easily, right? Alexei Tsipras folded and the Troika dominated him, but if potentially Varoufakis wouldn't have, right? So like in those moments, the whole tide of history could turn based on great leadership and great particular skills. But that person also needs to be operating in conjunction with a broader movement that shows and shares the values that are needed to be represented.
Yeah. This reminds me of the final sermon of Martin Luther King. Do you know this one?
I think so, but tell us.
The drum major instinct?
Is this the one where he calls out liberals?
No.
Damn it.
No, this
anyway,
is
Ryan.
Maybe we can put a little sample in here, but he
let's do it. Let's have a little Martin Luther King clip.
He talks about how when James and John wanted to be they wanted to be at the right hand of Christ, and what Jesus did not say was that's bad, you shouldn't do that. What he said was that you have to earn it, and you have to earn it by being the most humble servant of like humanity, that you can possibly be.
What was the answer that Jesus gave these men? It's very interesting. One would have thought that Jesus would have condemned them. One would have thought that Jesus would have said, "You're out of your place. You're selfish. Why would you raise such a question?" But that isn't what Jesus did. He did something altogether different. He said in substance, "Oh, I see. You want to be first? You want to be great? You want to be important? You want to be significant? Well, you ought to be. If you're going to be my disciple, you must be." But he reordered priorities. And he said, yes, don't give up this instinct. It's a good instinct if you use it right. Yes. It's a good instinct if you don't distort it and pervert it. Don't give it up. Keep feeling the need for being important. Keep feeling the need for being first. But I want you to be first in love. I want you to be first in moral excellence. I want you to be first in generosity. That is what I want you to do.
For an atheist, Coops knows his Bible really well.
I mean, best kind of atheist. So I wanted to drill down a bit more on this question of like I said, I agree with Raya that like the one thing we are dealing with here is the question of leadership, which is a necessity, which is there is no alternative to having leadership in a movement, to having leadership in a regime. And so you're met with the problem of first, like, how to pick that leadership, how to churn that leadership, how to bring in new leadership on what kind of time scale and what kind of manner to, like, shift regimes, that kind of thing. But also, like, the question of how to make sure that leadership does not translate into a kind of sclerotic elite that is then able to just perpetuate itself materially, economically, etc. over time. And, like, one of the things that's interesting to me about this is, like, we shit a lot these days on the Founding Fathers and the design of the American government, rightly, I should say. Because, like, the existence of the Senate is terrible, etc., etc. Filibuster's terrible, blah, 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 blah. But, like, the problem they were trying to solve of, like, how to build institutions to deliver good leadership is a genuine problem. And it is a problem you have to solve, and it is not obvious how to solve it. And, like, yes, they, like, approach that problem through the lens of, white land-owning male aristocracy. slaveholding, male, landowning, white aristocracy in many cases. But, like, the problem is still a problem, and even if, like, you're coming at it from a better perspective, you still have to address that problem, and you cannot escape it. Which is, like, one of the things that, like, this is one of the things that I find interesting about, like, parliamentary systems in Europe. And, of course, Europe has now subjected itself to the European Union, which is a complete fucking disaster. But, like, individual European countries, the parliamentary system, I actually think there's something really to recommend itself to, like, a democratic coalition, a majority coalition that can, in fact, rule and, like, implement its policies without, like, any filibuster, without the cooling saucer of the Senate or anything like that, because, like, it gives a feedback loop. It allows the populace to, like, experience their particular ideology, the results of that particular ideology, and to then render further verdicts. And that involves, like, the whole, like, snap elections, votes of no confidence, like, regular elections, all that kind of thing. But then, of course, we could also, like, build in the whole issue of, like, lottery selection, how that could be applied. I mean, we could go for days and, like, you know, how could we design a good system, like, starting with European parliamentary systems and then, like, building in these questions of the lottery and all the rest of it. But, yeah, anyway, that's what interests me, is this question of how to design those institutions to, like, deliver good leadership that has a definition of the good that is actually rooted in the needs of the people and that has some real expertise, but also is, like, accountable and does not, like, turn into a self-perpetuating aristocracy.
Yeah, well, look, like, radical republicanism in the classical sense, like what Rousseau talked about, would be massive assemblies of people. Look, if you've been to a DSA meeting, right, Democratic Socialists of America, it's like 100 people in a room, right? It's like technically everyone has an equal opportunity to inform the debate and the discussion and the vote and everything, but it's not how it actually works out, right? It's like a tedious, like, hours-long kind of mind-numbing experience, and, like, 6 people actually are the ones that talk. And that's a problem, but, like, often. But theoretically, though, procedurally, that's the thing. It's like, oh, anyone can talk, and this is here we go. We're going to talk for as long as it takes, and we can all inform the debate. And, like, theoretically, that's the thing that's much better than having a few elites just represent people, right? Because it's actually something that allows everyone to have a voice.
Yeah.
Then, so how do we address the problem of the fact that it does turn into, like, a mind-numbing?
Well, so I mean,
most of the time.
I could rant on this for a while, but, like, so here's the problem, right? So you have procedural and substantive issues, and they're related, right? So like, procedurally, you want everyone to have a voice, but, like, at the same time, what you want is also to have a system that allows every human being, every person, right, to be the best person they can be to inform that debate and discussion and vote, right? And so we have a problem where now we neither have the procedural access where everyone can be informed and inform the decisions, nor do we have the conditions which give people the freedom of time, energy, skill, right, to be good citizens. So it's like kind of Ouroboros feedback loop problem, right? Where, like,
you're talking about, like, the fact that everybody's exhausted by capitalism.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course. So, of course, the fucking DSA meetings look like that right now because we're in capitalism and we're in a fucking place where people are just going to meetings. Are you fucking kidding me? After working their asses off all day and trying to, like, pay the... So, like, you have to envision what it could be like under socialism differently, because the human being that will be involved in the democratic procedure then won't be the exhausted fucking, like, subject that is conditioned by capitalism in all the ways that it is now. You know what I mean? So, like, that's the thing we have to work towards. But it's a paradox. But, like, we have to undo the things that make us unable to be the people we need to be. Right?
Envision a world where going to, like, the weekly town hall meeting is actually a pleasant experience.
It's fun and pleasant. There's plenty of time. You've thought about it. It's interesting. People aren't stressed. You don't have to worry about the bills. You don't have to worry about your kids. Like, that's a fucking different assembly. You know what I'm saying?
Here's a concrete example from something I was researching today. So the United States is the only country in the OECD which has no national sick leave. And every other one, even Mexico and Turkey, have a national paid sick leave. However, there are certain states, and one of them is California, big liberal, full of filthy commies and hippies, which guarantees you a paid leave scheme. And here's how it works: if you have worked for a company for 30 days, you can begin to accrue paid sick leave at the rate of 1 hour per every 30 hours you've worked. And you up to a maximum of 24 hours per year, and then you can roll over 48 hours of any that you haven't used in a year, right? So this is how it gets much more complicated than that if you dig into the
Can I just
details.
say that the word accrue is a vulgar word that is just should never be uttered ever again. It's disgusting.
And so anyways, in our, probably the most, actually Massachusetts just passed a thing, which which won't even start happening until 2021, but it's like about 10 times more generous than that. Anyway, so that's how California's system, which was started in 2015, works. And then I don't know if I mentioned, after 90 days of working at this place, you can actually start to claim your sick leave that you have accrued. Here's how it works in Norway. If you have worked for one company for a month, you can get up to a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
That seems to be a difference in the hierarchy of values and who we value, right? Like that seems different to me, right?
Yeah, and so, the Norwegian sick leave scheme is considerably more expensive than the one in California, but
for whom? Expensive for whom, right?
Well, yeah, that is the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, you could imagine, like, not only is Election Day a national holiday, but you have, like, mandated early voting across the country, like a month's worth.
Well, you could just say if you had a parliamentary system, you could say you don't have to vote at all. You just register your party affiliation, and then say, like, once a month you take a census. You just see where everyone is, and you adjust the value the seats in Congress accordingly, right? And so you don't ever have to do anything.
Dude, there's so many possibilities. Like, the political imagination right now is so just pinched, as Ryan likes to say. It's a great phrase, pinched imagination. All we can think of is, like, to have, like, a quasi-fascist who wants to kill all people of color and, like just do violence all the time as our solution. But, like, there's so many ways we can respond to the bullshit of meritocracy and neoliberalism, right?
Right. 25-hour work week, baby. And then like mandated holidays. Like, federal government just basically tells, like, every local government, you give people holidays for whatever, like, the day of your town hall meeting is, or whatever the fuck that is. Yeah.
Well, that's it for this episode. We just wanted to say before we go, wishing everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, any other holidays you might be celebrating. And thanks for listening over the last few months.
Yes, indeed. Whatever makes you festive this time of year, we're there with you. So we hope you enjoy it and ring in the new year well.
Take care.
Last but not least, we have a friendly reminder that we have a Patreon. You can support the show with $5 a month and get an extra episode every week. We really appreciate the support, and it helps us keep this going.